Let's do it. 3, 2, 1. During this time, we have racial tensions, ecological disasters like wildfires and hurricanes, and the COVID-19 pandemic going on. These are all resulting in tragic loss of so many lives, affecting families, communities, and cultures, as well as an increase in population and the disruption of natural ecosystems. When the world is all out of whack, it is time to restore the balance between people and nature. That's where Eco Bible comes in and tells us how. Today, I have the author of Eco Bible, Rabbi Yonatan Neril. Welcome, Rabbi. Say hello.
Hello, good to be here with you.
Did I say your name correctly?
Yes.
Okay. I realized that as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I forgot to ask if I said your name correctly. So, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Northern California on an acre of land with an organic garden that I gardened with my mother. I grew up going to a Jewish summer camp near Yosemite, where I encountered the wonders of nature in Yosemite National Park. And I came to Israel about 18 years ago. I married my wife about 14 years ago, and we have 2 children. One is 10 and one is 5. And I direct an organization here called the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, which reveals the connection between religion and ecology and mobilizes people to act.
All right. And you also went to Stanford, correct?
I did, yes.
That's something to be very proud of. That's awesome.
Yeah, actually, in the class ahead of me was the senator from the junior senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley. We both studied history and took some classes together. So he's more well known than I am.
Well, you are a big deal. I'll be honest, I was very nervous about interviewing you. And you've done quite a bit of public speaking. You spoke at the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi, and the Fez Climate Conscious Summit, and the Parliament of World Religions. So you've come quite a bit. You're definitely spreading the word of sustainabilism.
I'm trying to, and I'm trying to connect spirituality and sustainability. It's an important topic, and many people who are identify as people of faith, they think that religion is one thing and ecology is another thing, and that never do the two meet. And part of the work that I'm doing is revealing that actually ecological sustainability is a deep part of religion. It's not foreign to religion, it's part of religion.
I like that. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it's a good question. This book is actually it's the 3rd book that I've been a co-author of, and it's really an attempt to show that the Hebrew Bible, in the first volume we look at Genesis and Exodus, that the Bible has deep things to say about ecological sustainability. Until now, there wasn't a book that you could open up and see the commentaries on hundreds of verses in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, and now with volume 1 and with volume 2, which we're planning to publish in 2021, this year already, we're revealing these verses. Volume 2 is going to be on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So, and we in this book we look at the views of hundreds of Jewish sages and also hundreds of scientists, and put them together in a volume. The volume 1 is about 250 pages, so it's manageable and accessible to the lay reader.
That is true. I read your book. It's about 176 pages and chock full of information. It's really cool. Now, you are a very religious man. You're a rabbi, and I am not at your level of religiousness, and I don't know if all of the listeners of the podcast, I don't know where their level is in regards of religion and closeness to God. Can you remind everybody what the books of Genesis and Exodus are about?
Sure. Yeah, I understand that, we all have different relations to religion and spirituality, and I'm sure everyone also, it's not a spectrum. There's some people who are very close to God, even though, on the outside, it may not seem that way. So The book of Genesis goes from the creation of the worlds to the death of Joseph and everything in between. In that story, it talks about the story of Noah and Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah and their 12 sons and daughter Dinah. And all the stories that take place from Iraq to Turkey to Syria to Israel to Egypt. And within the book of Genesis, there's deep ecological teachings. And then within the book of Exodus, which begins with the Israelites increasing in the land of Egypt and then becoming enslaved by the Egyptians, and God selecting Moses to be the prophet to bring the Israelites out of Egypt and bringing the 10 plagues on Egypt. And then the story of the Israelites once they've gone through the sea and into the desert. And building of the sanctuary or the tabernacle in the wilderness. That's the focus of the book of Exodus.
That is an excellent summary. Good job.
Thank you.
When I read this book, I noticed it focuses on about 250 Hebrew Bible verses, and it explains how to live sustainably. It talks about many of the big topics like coronavirus, increasing population, microplastics in the ocean, fires in Australia, factory farming, acid rain, the plagues, clean water, minimalism. It hits like every single sustainable topic possible out there. And I think that's wonderful that it's able to do that, that you were able to make all those connections within the Bible. And I'll be blunt, reading the Bible can be very complex and therefore overwhelming and kind of hard to interpret. So I really like the way that your book is great at it's basically explaining it like it is. Like, here's the verse and here's how it applies to sustainability. I'm nervous because now I know that I'm being recorded.
Yeah. First of all,
I'm like
I
losing my
appreciate
flow.
that you read my book. It's so amazing that I invested along with my co-author Rabbi Leo D. We invested a lot of time in working on the book, as did our editors, Deborah Rose and other editors. And here, you've read the book, and so I'm just really grateful that here you are in Indiana, and you have your own approach, and to hear your questions and your sense of the book was really gratifying for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've noticed that the literal layout of the book is basically you read the Bible verse and then it has the explanation when it comes to sustainability, how it applies, and what God intended and how we as humans are or are not doing what it says. So how did you make all of the connections and conclusions on all of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so that actually relates to your first question, a little bit about my background. So because I grew up on an acre of land and because I grew up going to Yosemite National Park every summer, and I studied environmental issues in college, so I grew up with a certain level of environmental awareness. California is an amazing state with these natural gems, and in my fourth grade class, we went on a field trip where we went on a boat to look at the whales. It was like, what an amazing, fourth grade field trip. And then fifth grade, we had an environmental education in the Santa Cruz Mountains and the redwood trees, these, the oldest trees in the world, coast redwoods. So because I grew up with this background, sort of ecological lens, when I started studying the Bible more intensely, which was at the age of 22 when I came to Israel and I started studying in Jewish studies centers, I came to realize that these verses have deep things to say about ecological sustainability. And then I looked at Jewish rabbinic commentary, which is spanning over 2,000 years. And I saw in that commentary also deep things on ecological sustainability. So, and I started writing it down. I took little notes, like here's an example of a note that's on my desk. And me and others typed up these notes. And then sort of compiled these different teachings. Here's from Maimonides, who lived about 800 years ago, 900 years ago. And here's from Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the time of the Romans 2,000 years ago. and here's their commentary on this Bible verse, and it's something ecological, and putting it all together, with the help of a computer and editors, and then it sort of all came together, and then adding science, modern scientists, because at one level we can relate to the Bible verse and the commentators, but then looking at modern science and the ecological challenges that we're facing today.
And I like that because there is quite a debate on religion versus science, and you've done a great job at taking science very seriously and using science and research to explain the importance of changing our actions and to address the ecological crisis and end it, and incorporating it with all of the biblical verses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's also another important thing about the book, is that it's showing that the Bible and science are compatible, and specifically environmental science. There's a lot of people who believe that environmental science is antithetical to the Bible for one reason or another. But in fact, environmental scientists are really, they're just sort of like making a diagnosis of what's happening on the earth. They're looking at the water, they're looking at the air, they're looking at the climate, looking at the oceans, and they're looking at the animals, and they're saying, look, this is what humans are doing to planet Earth. It's a little bit cut and dry, with these scientific papers. And so therefore, to argue with environmental science, from my perspective, it's sort of like the reason that people argue with environmental science, I don't think, is because of the actual science. The science is pretty solid. And actually, with climate science, no significant new discovery has been made in climate science in 40 years. Everything, the main tenets of climate science have been established since 1979. I think the reason that many people of faith are skeptical of environmental science is because environmental scientists are actually revealing a deeper spiritual principle, which is that we're living out of balance. And a lot of people, even religious people, don't want to hear that the way that we're living needs to change, that there's something out of balance in the way that we're living. So therefore, what this book does in bringing both religious teachings and scientific teachings is to show that both the religious leaders and scientists are saying similar things, and which is that we're living out of balance and that we need to change. And then the book gives practical suggestions on how we can change, how we can live more sustainably.
It does. I noticed that at the end of each section, that you have a list of, like, here's little actions that you can do with your family. You can shop locally. You can find reused clothing items or secondhand clothing items, all these little actions that you've come up with. And I think that's wonderful that you put that together, because that's hard for people to understand. What actions can I do? It's very easy to say, oh, go become a vegan. Well, it's really hard to just go become a vegan. It's very challenging. It's a big upheaval in your lifestyle. But when you have all those little actions listed of simple little things that you can do, like going for a walk in nature, take a foraging class, you had so many listed. I think that's wonderful. How did you come up with those lists of actions for people to take?
Well, actually, a member of our team, Fagel Train, worked on that. So I give her credit for many of them. And we tried to make those action items relate to the specific Bible commentaries. So I'll just give you one example, since you mentioned about being a vegan. It says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food." In other words, God says to people, eat plants. It's one of the only things that God says to people in the first chapter of Genesis. And then the next verse 30, God says to animals, eat plants. And it was so. And then the next verse 31 says, and God saw all that he had made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. And so the one question is, why does God say that it was very good on the sixth day of creation, whereas the other days that God doesn't say it was very good? God just says it was good. And one understanding is that God created a system where life did not take life to sustain life. The lion lay down with the lamb, and all the creatures subsisted on a plant-based diet. Now that system was changed after the flood and the wicked generation of Noah, so that after the flood, God said to people, okay, you can eat meat. But according to Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel and one of the leading Jewish sages in the past 1,000 years, the vision of the first chapter of Genesis of a plant-based diet for both people and animals is a vision that we can return to. He said this in 1903, and many rabbis today, as well as many Christian pastors and priests, have taken on a vegetarian or a vegan lifestyle. So now for a lot of people, it's too hard to go cold turkey. So there's also an idea of being a reducitarian, that many people eat either meat or dairy or eggs or fish at every meal that they eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's possible to say, look, okay, one meal a week, I'm going to eat a plant-based meal, or I'm going to make efforts to reduce the amount of meat that I eat, which also will probably lead to health benefits for many people.
And as well, environmental benefits too.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a true vegan. And that's something that I enjoy. So I'm a registered dietitian by trade. I do this podcasting thing on the side. And I agree that eating a plant-based diet is extremely healthy, and it is very hard to just give up meat and dairy and eggs. It's hard to just give that up and become vegan. So you're talking about reducitarian. I have not heard that term before until I read it in your book, but I usually say flexitarian. So you don't have to be vegetarian or vegan, but you can be flexitarian. Practice meatless Mondays, or even if you just go plant-based breakfast, lunch, and then at dinner you can have meat. All of that is still helpful. It all comes together. So that's an excellent suggestion that you have given from your example in the Bible. Another one that I really liked was in regards to Adam and Eve committing the first sin. Now, I think most people are familiar with that story, even if they don't have a huge exposure to religion. They still know about Adam and Eve and the apple and eating the apple, and that's the first sin. And I found it very eye-opening that Adam was also found to be sinning in this. And it's not because of the act of eating the apple. It was because he didn't find out where it came from. And that translates to today, us not knowing where our own food comes from. Was it sourced locally, ethically, were the farmers paid a fair wage? Are there potential toxins used in growing the food? And that was very eye-opening to me. I was like, I know this story of Adam and Eve and the apple, and I've never ever thought about it on pertaining to, are you familiar with where your food comes from? This is why you should shop local. That's what I love about your book, is that you've done an excellent job of just connecting the dots.
Yeah. So look, I appreciate what you said. And it's definitely, Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 6 is about Adam and Eve and Adam eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what you mentioned is a understanding of Rabbi Chaim ben Moshe ibn Attar, who said that Adam didn't know he was eating from the forbidden fruit, and his sin was in not trying to find out where Eve got the fruit she gave to him. When God said to them, look, there's one tree in the garden you shouldn't eat from, everything else you can eat from. So when Eve gave him a piece of fruit, Adam should have said, well, I just want to make sure before I eat this, that this didn't come from the tree that God said not to eat, because that was the one command. And so that's according to Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar. And our reality is that we eat foods that are really much of the food we eat is unknown to us. The main thing that's known to us is the brand, whether it's Pringles or Domino's or McDonald's. Comes in a package, comes in a box, and where the ingredients come from, God knows where they came from. So I think, and so therefore the linkage that we make in this commentary is, if the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was in not knowing where one's food came from, so we can learn from that we should make more of an effort to learn where our food comes from. And that's based on a sustainability principle, that to live more sustainable lives, we can't just live under this veil of ignorance of where the food comes from, because there's an ecological cost to that. There's a cost to our bodies if we're eating foods, that have a lot of pesticides residue, and so therefore, do we know if the farm workers were paid a fair wage? Do we know what potentially harmful toxins were used in the growing? Do we grow any of our food ourselves? Those are some of the questions we ask to try to, connect the dots, as you said in this teaching.
I could go on and on about pulling all my favorite little excerpts from this book, but we do have a time limit. Otherwise, this will take us about 6 days to get through this interview. So I'll move along. But listeners, if you want to learn more information about fun topics like vegan crocodiles, I really want to pick your brain about that. How the Ark was the first green building, organic fertilizer. They even have farming tips from Noah in there, the slow food movement, how all the plagues came about because of the ecological disasters. You even have discussions of palm trees and solar energy in there. That's why I was like, I wish we could make this interview last a whole lot longer, because I really want to have all these discussions with you, but we'll speed through, but we'll just leave those as teasers for the listeners. So definitely go out and read the Eco Bible, because you can get all your questions answered. But I would like to ask you another question, Rabbi. Why is it so important to address the spiritual roots of the ecological crisis? Why should people turn to the Bible in a time like this?
It's a great question. Since 1988, nations of the world have come together to try to negotiate agreements to curb climate change. And every year they've gotten together, and every year they've tried to come to an agreement. Sometimes they have come to an agreement, like in Kyoto, Japan, or in Paris 5 years ago. But the reality is that human emissions increase every year. And that's been the case now for 33 years, now that we're in 2021. One definition of insanity is trying the same solution over and over again and expecting a different result. And I think that's the case with our ecological crisis. The current approaches that see the problem as only linked to fossil fuels are not working. And one of the reasons they're not working is that they're only dealing with the symptom of the problem while they're not addressing the root. The ecological crisis is not about the birds and the bees or the trees and the toads. It's about how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And so therefore, the root issues of the ecological crisis are not plastics or fossil fuels or water pollution or lead pipes. The root issues are greed, arrogance, short-term thinking, egoism, and the root solutions are long-term thinking, moderating consumption, altruism, caring for other people and other creatures, finding spiritual pleasure in community and family and spiritual practice. So therefore, I believe that for humanity to reach a sustainable lifestyle, it can only be done through the help and through the active involvement of spirituality and religion. And so therefore, that's why it's important to realize what the Bible says about ecological sustainability, because for 2.2 billion Christians and 15 million Jews, the Hebrew Bible is a source of wisdom and of spiritual guidance. And many people, including in Indiana, many clergy teach and preach on these connections. About the Bible, and part of the work of my organization is to help clergy to speak more about ecological sustainability.
Would you say that this information is, so you're putting all this together through the Hebrew Bible, but I would still say it's applicable to all religions. Would you agree?
I think so, although, Muslims hold the Quran to be a sacred book, and they have the Hadith that's interpreting that. Hindus have the Bhagavad Gita. Buddhists have their own sacred texts, as do Shintos and people of other religions. So I believe that this book is important, primarily for Christians and Jews, because they're the ones who understand the Bible as a sacred book. At the same time, Muslims, many of the prophets that appear in the Bible are considered prophets by Muslims. Moses, Samuel, and others. So I think there's also some relevance for Muslims, but there's also many Muslim environmental teachings that come straight from the Quran and the Hadith, and so this I feel is more appropriate for people who see the Bible as their sacred book.
I'm wondering if all the other religions that you listed in their books, I have not looked into their books, and I don't know if you have either, but I would imagine that there would be some type of sustainable guidelines within those books as well.
Yes,
Do you think? Okay.
and so for the past 10 years, I founded and directed the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. So as you mentioned, I've been at interfaith environmental conferences in a number of different places. I attended the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change in Istanbul 5 years ago. And so I've come to learn a bit about Muslim environmental teachings, which are very deep. And I've met Hindu swamis who speak about Islam and ecology. Some of these teachings are on the YouTube channel of my organization. And so I've come to see that every religion has deep teachings to say about ecological sustainability. And in fact, there's a lot of commonalities between religious teachings. That's what I mentioned earlier of seeing the spiritual root as relating to greed and apathy and arrogance and short-term thinking, and as seeing the spiritual solutions as about spiritual practice and slowing down and caring for God's creation. These are commonalities that are found in many religions.
What is your advice for those who are not religious?
Well, first of all, 85% of people in the world identify with a religion. So as I said earlier, these are 6 billion people, and we're not going to achieve sustainability if these 6 billion people are not actively part of a solution for sustainability. Now, for someone who's a diehard atheist or agnostic, many such people actually welcomed when Pope Francis wrote his encyclical called Laudato Si on care for our common home, because even though they may not, be religious or affiliate with a religion, but just to see, the head of the Catholic Church, there's 1.6 billion Catholics, and to see him getting on board and really pushing for a faith-based sustainability effort, a lot of secular people said, this is great, this is amazing, this needs to happen, even if they themselves, may not be going to church. It's still important, I think that's another key thing, is that for the environmental movement, which tends to be secular, part of the reason the environmental movement has not been successful, in the past 50 years since it began. I mean, it's been successful in some respects, but in terms of the big shifts that the ecological movement is seeking, it has not been successful because it has not gotten the bulk of humanity who identify with a religion fully on board. And that's, I feel like, the key work right now is most voters in America identify with a religion. And so for there to be real ecological movement and ecological legislation by Congress, religious Americans have to also support this. And I think they're only going to support this if their clergy speak about it. And I think their clergy are only going to speak about it if their clergy learn about it in seminary. And so therefore, that's part of the change that we're promoting with Eco Bible, is let's get this front and center on the agenda of seminaries and clergy so that they bring this to people's attention and make it front of mind for, Americans.
I'm glad that you brought all of that up, because I wanted to ask about that. So growing up, I went to a Presbyterian church in Fowler, Indiana, and then I moved to Texas, where I tried a couple of non-denominational churches there, and then we went to Florida. I went to a couple of churches there. Now I'm back in Indiana, and through all of my years of going to church and all the different locations that I've gone to church, I honestly cannot recall a church sermon that was about having a sustainable focus. How can we better the earth? So I'm hoping that with your book and talks like this, and I saw this in one of your little action steps. You're talking about the green teams in churches. And I want to make that a recommendation to the listeners and to the viewers of the YouTube channel that you have to consider that. I don't have one in my current church. We don't have a green team. But now that I've read your book and I got that idea in my head, I would like to go forward and ask, hey, can we have a green team in this church? And why don't we have one? What can we do? Can you elaborate on your green team idea to kind of help explain that?
Yeah, so my organization, uh, together with California Interfaith Power and Light, last year launched the Los Angeles Green Faith and Ecology Network, and we work with green team leaders and clergy to promote the greening of houses of worship, both the speaking and preaching on religion and ecology, as well as the physical infrastructure, making it more energy efficient, installing solar energy, etc. In Chicago, there's a similar network, which is put in place by an organization called Faith in Place of Chicago Green Team Networks. And there's a phenomenon that exists in thousands of congregations in America of sort of like a social action committee, but it's a green team of where members of the congregation say it's important that we have ecological sustainability as part of what the church does, or the synagogue or mosque does. And therefore these people come together and they form the green team, and there's a lot of resources online that exist to help this as a way of greening the efforts of the house of worship. What you said of not hearing from your pastors about ecological sustainability, that's the case for most Americans. There's a study from the Pew Center which indicates that most clergy in America don't speak about ecological sustainability. But that same study shows that when they do, the congregants tend to take action, and it's a motivator for them because clergy are moral voices. So, and another thing is that a lot of young people today are more concerned about ecological sustainability than they are about theology or scripture or liturgy or hermeneutics. And I could preach to you till I'm red in the face about the hermeneutics of Genesis, but if I'm going to actually reach the hearts and minds of a lot of young people, it's going to require that I relate to what they feel is most important in their lives. And what many young people feel is most important, this is why many people go out for a climate strike, and why many young people are reducing their animal product consumption, because they feel like we're in an ecological crisis. They see it themselves. They see the fires, they see the droughts, they see the floods. It's not about the science. You don't have to read a scientific journal to see in front of your eyes that the oldest trees in the world in Big Basin, the coast redwoods, just burned down a month ago. It's like that hasn't happened in 2,000 years. And so therefore, as one of my rabbis said, we're living in times that our ancestors have been dreaming about for thousands of years. But the moment is calling on us toward a spiritual evolution. And that evolution is about revealing the connection between spirituality and sustainability.
Very well said. I have no idea what hermedesis, what was that word you said?
Hermeneutics. It just means interpretation.
What is that? Oh. Yeah. Sorry. I was like, what is that word? I don't know. But you're right. I'm the younger generation. I don't know what that means, but I do care about the climate change. So case in point. You did tell us that you have a number 2 book coming out, and you gave us a brief summary of that already, but I want to know, do you have any other future plans for your books? Like, do you have an audiobook coming out, or do you have a study, like a Bible study guide that people could do within their churches or houses of worship?
Great question. So we've published this as a hardcover and a paperback and an ebook, and we're coming out with an audiobook for Eco Bible that should be available.
Yay! I'm a very busy individual, and I love audiobooks, so that's wonderful.
Okay, amazing. So we're gonna publish this as an audiobook, and we're also planning to make discussion guides for Bible study out of this book. We realized that that's an important next step for the book, to make it, to provide this resource to Bible study groups at different houses of worship. And we're planning to do that in the coming year, this year.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because I'm actively involved in our women's Bible study. And I was like, when I was reading your book, I thought, man, I really want to bring this to the table, but it's a lot easier if there's a guide. I mean, I could sit down and try to come up with a guide, but I'll just wait a year for you to do it, and then we'll just implement it then. So if listeners of the podcast want to get your book, where do they go?
Well, we've published it on Amazon as an ebook, a Kindle ebook, as well as a paperback. It's also available in bookstores. And if your local bookstore doesn't have it, then you can just ask them for it, and they can order it on Ingram as a hardcover or paperback. It's also available on iBooks for those who have Apple devices. It's available on Kobo. So we've tried to make it as widely available as possible.
And if listeners want to just learn more about you and your teachings and your interfaith work, where can they go?
So our website is interfaithsustain.com, which is short for the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. And they can see some of the teachings there. We also have an active YouTube channel, an active Facebook page. We have a blog. So those are some of the places you could find more about our work.
Is the Facebook page just Interfaith, or what's the Facebook page?
Yeah, you just search for Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, and that'll take you there.
Do you have any other social media like Instagram, Twitter?
We have a Twitter
TikTok?
account, we have Pinterest. So, we're trying to make religion and ecology relevant for the modern world and the ADD MTV generation as well.
Yeah, I only have Facebook and Instagram and a website that I struggle with, because technology's not my world either. So wonderful. You're doing great. And then okay. So I wanted to end the interview with this. Near the end of the book, it wasn't quite at the very end, but it was near the end. There was a sentence that really stood out to me. It says, "We steal from God when we misuse creation because we are only stewards of the planet while God remains its ultimate owner." Does that speak out to you as well?
Yeah, it really speaks to me. I mean, and that really, you're mentioning this verse, it really speaks to a central message in the book, which is that how we live ecologically is a religious issue. And the reason for that is because God's creation God made it, and God has placed us here as temporary dwellers. We don't control this earth. We're not, even though it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and conquer it and dominate it." God said that to one person right after God created the first human being. And in our times, there was an organization that brought a group of Christian pastors in Kentucky to do an aerial tour of the open top mining in Kentucky, open top coal mining and other type of mining. And these pastors looked at that and saw what we're doing to God's creation and had a religious experience. And they realized that there's a Jewish teaching that God showed Adam all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, "See how beautiful and praiseworthy are my works. Everything that I created for you. Be careful not to destroy or despoil my creation, because if you do, there will be no one after you to repair it." Many religious people think that it doesn't matter what we do ecologically because God will just take care of it. Like, God will just sort of wave a magic wand and all the water pollution and the extra carbon in our atmosphere and the soil pollution, that'll all just go away. We can, God just wants us to live in abundance and to, enjoy life. And God has given us all this wealth that God would just blesses us with it. And it doesn't matter how we treat the earth. Well, I think that that's a theological error. And that's supported by different teachings in my tradition that we need to be stewards of God's creation. And therefore it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, and God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to serve it and conserve it. And the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks understands that what does it mean to conserve it? It means to care for and to be stewards for God's creation. And that's really the task that we have today. So I'll just leave you with a story that the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison said, that a young boy came to an elder woman with a bird in his hands. And he said to the woman, "Can you tell me whether the bird in my hands is alive or dead?" And the woman thought to herself and realized that the boy was playing a trick on her. Because if she said that the bird was dead, he would open up his hands and let the bird fly away. And if she said that the bird was alive, he would close his hands and crush the bird. And either way, she'd be wrong. He had her coming and going. So she thought to herself for a minute, and she said to the young boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." And that's really our situation today. Each of us has responsibility. Each of us has power. And part of the power that we have is to what extent we live sustainably. And so I just give us a blessing that we should really find in the deep teachings of the Bible the messages for ecological sustainability and help to reveal a sustainable path through the light and wisdom of spirituality.
Very well said. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's
Welcome.
a great story. So before you go, I do this with all of my guests. We're going to play a quick game.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So I tried to tailor the games the best that I can towards the guest and the topic. So this game is called King, Prophet, or Regular Guy. And this is, so I grew up with like the Christian Bible, and you're familiar with the Hebrew Bible. So it was a little tricky for me to put this together. So bear with me. But basically, I'm going to say a name, and you have to tell me if that person is a king, a prophet, or regular guy.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
There's only 7. You got
Okay.
this. Isaiah.
Prophet.
Hey, there we go. You got one right already. Saul.
King.
Yes, good job. Gomer.
Regular guy.
Yeah. You're doing great. 3 for 3 so far. Solomon.
King.
Yes, good job. Micah.
Prophet.
Fantastic. You got 2 left. You got a good streak going, 5 out of 5 so far. Caleb.
Regular guy, even though, I mean, the story about him in the book of Numbers is he was more than a regular guy, but in the Bible, I would say he wasn't a king or a prophet. Yeah.
You're correct. He's not a king, he's not a prophet. For this game, he's a regular guy. And the last one is Uriah.
Regular guy.
Okay, I have him as a prophet.
Uh-huh. Okay, I'm familiar with a figure that Bathsheba's husband, who King David had killed, who I believe was named Uriah. But we can leave this one to God.
Okay. I was like, honestly, whatever you say goes, because some of these I had to research on Wikipedia. So whatever you say goes. You're definitely the expert here. But you did awesome. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
You did
it's
excellent.
always fun to play a game.
All right. So we talked about this at the beginning before we hit the record button, but I'm in Franklin, Indiana, and it's almost noon here, and you're in Jerusalem, and it's almost 7 p.m. for you.
That's right.
All right. So you probably have some dinner plans at this point in time.
I think so. And thank you so much for our conversation. It's really great to speak with you and engage with all your listeners.
All right. Well, I appreciate you reaching out to me and letting me know about Eco Bible. It was a very eye-opening read. I don't want to say it was a quick read because even though it was simple to read the book, it was extremely thought provoking. So it took me time to read the book because I would read a page and just sit there and think about it. I'm like, man, I've just never looked at this verse or looked at this Bible story with a sustainable lens on. And it was extremely eye opening. So I'm glad that you're doing all the hard work and all the research. I don't know if I said it earlier, but in your book, you have 704 sources, like resources for information, and it's a 176 page book. So I was like, you definitely put in a lot of effort to make sure that the science and the credibility and everything that needs to be there is there. And it's a very, very well written, well put together book. So good job and congratulations. And I look forward to book number 2 coming out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for reading it and for revealing about it to the listeners.
All right. I will let you go enjoy dinner with your family now.
Okay, thank you.